Hi there, I'm Desire Shaw with Faith Counts, and I'm here with Dr. Josh Packard, Executive Director of Springtide Research Institute. Now, Springtide listens and amplifies the voices of young people as the only sociological research institute dedicated to people aged 13 to 25. And the last time we connected with Springtide and you, Dr. Packard, should I call you Dr. Packard or do you prefer?
You can call me Josh, it's great.
Okay. Yeah. The last time we connected with you was when you helped write an article for Faith Counts about how Gen Z is getting lonelier and how faith leaders can make a difference about that. That was back in February, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so now we're back. You have some really fresh insights that we are really anxious to hear about from you directly, and it's concerning the spiritual beliefs, practices, values, and relationships of Gen Zers, and that they're pulling from as well as sort of away from the more formal structure of faith. So can you just tell us about what you've learned in the wake of some really unprecedented times and uncertainties for young people, and how maybe if you want to tie back, where we started in February and where we are now?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on to say this is a great opportunity to chat about these things. We're big fans of the work that you all do at Faith Counts, and you're right. Like it's a concept that we call faith unbundled that helps to explain what sort of how young people are assembling and making sense out of their spiritual, religious, and faith lives. It's part of the study that we do every year called the State of Religion in Young People. And every year is a different focus. This year is about navigating uncertainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty in young people's lives, generally speaking, as you alluded to. But there's also a lot of uncertainty in their religious lives, in their faith lives, and there's a lot of parallels then about how they're trying to navigate both of those simultaneous uncertainties. And the common thread there is that because they exist in such a low institutional trust world. I mean, they don't trust institutions. Their parents don't trust institutions. And so therefore they're really disconnected from them and from the guides and trusted adults who are inside of those institutions. It means that they're largely just left to assemble answers to that uncertainty in a variety of different ways. And it looks really interesting. I mean, part of it is just trying to get through today, but then, when you're asking these big religious, spiritual questions, what happens when I die? What should I do with my life? What's the purpose of being here? How do I find meaning? Those are not really just things that you can get through for a day or for a period of time. You're ultimately trying to find long-term durable answers. And it's been really interesting to hear young people tell us stories about how they engage with these traditional religious structures and systems, but unwilling to just sort of adopt one of them, wholesale. And say, yes, I am that thing, and subscribe to all of the various beliefs and all the things that come with that one thing. And that's sort of what contributes to this notion of exploration, this curiosity, this desire for wholeness among young people that make up the core tenets of Faith Unbundled.
And are you seeing this kind of trend across the board, across different religious denominations and traditions?
Yeah, well, so like 40% of young people, I mean, the second largest group, if we counted them as a religious group, 40% of young people claim no religious affiliation. Mm-hmm. And so, when we're talking about young people, we have to, I think it's important to start with that and the notion, to remember that Gen Z is it's the most diverse generation that has ever existed anywhere in the history of the world, in this country right now. And so, trying to sort of peg them down as any one thing is a little bit tricky. But we do see a lot of commonality in this approach as they try to figure out, the many things that make up who they are. This idea that they are interested in learning about those systems, but are maybe not just sort of like taking what's handed to them, seems to be pretty true across the board for them.
That's really interesting. What is your what insights or what suggestions do you provide for faith leaders, or would you just, what would you have to say to parents? I'm a young mom, So
Mhm.
what would you have to say about this kind of trend of testing the boundaries and then having faith unbundled?
Yeah. Well, it really is, I think, about two things. One is to start the conversation as early as possible. So it's true that this, families, parents, whoever's in the home with a young person, which is not always parents, um, those are the most important influences on a young person's religious and spiritual life. That remain, as has always been the case, it remains the case today. So starting that conversation as early as possible. But then as we shift and young people grow up and maybe they turn, not your kids to say, your kids would never do this, but some kids I hear stop listening to their parents at some point. um, and they start paying attention to their peers more and to other people. uh, that doesn't mean that their parents and their guardians become less important to them. On the contrary, it just means that other voices are introduced into this conversation. And for those voices, I think it's really incumbent that they stay in the conversation with young people for as long as young people will have them. And this is really in contrast to this model which I think still characterizes most of what churches and mosques and synagogues especially are doing. A lot of campus ministries are doing this very organizationally, institutionally driven model, which assumes a high level of institutional trust, where it's like, okay, we're going to put it out there, we're going to show them how great it is, and like really, they're going to either take it or leave it, but they're hopefully going to take it, and then they'll come to faith in some big ceremony, and then that'll be that, and we can wash our hands of it. Well, those kinds of ultimatums for young people, they miss the point about what really characterizes young people's lives is change and exploration. It's always been true. And so these bold proclamations are never quite as durable as we would have liked to have maybe thought they were. But I think it also misses the point of this generation, which is that when they come to you and ask you questions, or you get a chance to share your faith tradition with them, they're not even hearing that as a take it or leave it. They're hearing that as the next step in a conversation. If you end the conversation, then you're done. But they're not ending the conversation there. I mean, they're turning to TikTok, they're turning to other religious leaders, they're turning to their friends. Like, they are still interested in these questions. And so I think it really calls on us to redesign some of those systems to be more geared toward fostering that conversation over years. Not just sort of waiting for these trying to get like Christians trying to get their kids through confirmation, or trying to get them baptized, or for Jewish communities to try and get their young people bar mitzvah or something like that. I mean, we are really talking about an ongoing relationship over the course of a decade, that starts hopefully early at home and is continued by other trusted adults in that young person's life. I mean, that's really how they're going to best be able to explore these religious and faith questions.
I'm glad you mentioned technology, because, my kids will never know a world where they're not swiping or, clicking on something.
Yeah.
Like that's their, that is their life. That's their world as they know it. Can you speak to sort of the technological aspect of this particular demographic and how it's become the access that they have? It's like never before. I mean, because I said so just doesn't work anymore. Like you were saying, they're questioning so much and they have access to so much information. How do you kind of navigate that as a parent or a faith leader? I think you kind of touched on that, but if you could, expound, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we have plans to collect data about this in the near future. We haven't done a formal study about this, but we know that young people are living out. Um, they're doing a fair amount of religious seeking and work on social media channels. I don't want to give you the impression that like somehow I don't want people thinking that everything they do on TikTok is really important and is like answering life's deepest questions. I mean, sometimes what they're doing on YouTube is just watching funny fail videos or whatever. But there is also very serious work going on in those places. And what the young people that we've been asking about, we've been asking them about this as we gear up to do a full study. What they've essentially been telling us is that when adults dismiss their online lives as silly or unimportant, that those adults basically disqualify themselves from the conversation about important things in their lives, because young people don't think they can be trusted. So, on the one hand, we don't want to assume that everything that's happening there is like a life or death situation, but at the same time, some of the things going on there are life and death situations. I mean, they really are that important. and we should be taking them seriously, and we should be listening and really seeing what they're engaged with and trying to figure out who's influencing them and who they're listening to, because the reality is like if you want to know something about tarot, there's a million influencers on any of those platforms who can tell you everything that you might want to know about tarot. And I mean, that's always been true, since the internet has been around. I mean, that has been the case now for 25 years or more. But it's heightened, when it's attached to a singular person that you can access whenever you want to. It's a challenge, I think, for parents, for religious educators, et cetera. Not only how do you engage on those platforms, but how do you, how do you even shape your young person's engagement on those platforms? And if you come from a particular religious background that you want them to adopt or subscribe to, then how do you enter into that conversation where what being a teenager is like. Your parental voice might carry as much weight on a given day as somebody they've never met thousands of miles away from them.
Yeah.
I think it's a real challenge, but it's something we have to be attentive to.
I think so too. And I like really not only that you're talking about listening, but that you guys actually do in your research. I think, the whole mission of Faith Counts is really to promote the value of faith among young people. And I really, I think what's so interesting about your research is that you include the voices of those people. I think, is it through your ambassador program or?
Yeah, that's right. So
okay.
we have, and in fact, that call is out right now for next year's ambassadors. If you know of a young person that would be interested in engaging in a community of young people, a small community that meets every month to explore some of these issues, we'd love to see an application. It's called our Springtide Ambassadors Program. We also have, every time we do a study, we put out a season of our podcast, The Voices of Young People, where you get to hear young people sort of, exploring these issues, in real time. But we have all we have a writer in residence program too. A young person, Hannah Connors, who just started with us. I'm really excited about what she's going to contribute next year, writing about some of these issues. So yes, you're right. In a variety of ways, as I say, we're trying to not become a bunch of old people studying young people.
Right. That's so, it's such a value add. And I'm wondering, we talked about parents, we talked about youth leaders. Do you have a specific message to young people? Like what, based on your research, is there something encouraging that you would say, to somebody who is in maybe a place of questioning or doubt, or, just they want to be affirmed in the fact that, they are worshiping in their own way. They do still have faith. Like, what is your message to that person or those people?
A really good question, and not one that I get very often. But here's what I would say. It's I feel like we spend a lot of time trying to do the opposite, right? Which is to try and get adults to understand that young people are authentically interested in these questions. But I would say the opposite here for young people, which is that there are so many. The vast majority of adults who work in religious spaces of some kind who genuinely care about your well-being. They certainly, of course, have their core set of beliefs, but that they really do care about your flourishing and thriving and well-being first. And I understand why young people are not always willing to take that first step to initiate, to go to a church or mosque, synagogue, or to show up to a campus ministry event or something like that. I get it. At the same time, I think they would often be surprised by what they found there. If they were able to find themselves in those spaces in some way, or have those conversations with those leaders, or reached out and asked them questions, I think you'd find just a whole lot of people who care about you first and foremost.
It's a really good message.
It's true, thankfully.
Yeah.
It's an easy one to report. It's I feel like our job at Springtide would be much different and much harder if we kept running into religious leaders who were like, well, I don't really care about these young people as long as they just, check the box. But that's not what we hear. It's just, I think that's often the perception we have about that young people sometimes have about religious leaders, but it's not actually what I hear when I, give presentations around the country or talk to people who are, reading our work or using our stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's all about that uncertainty, right? You're just not ever sure until you take that first step. Yeah. So I think that's a really good answer. And then lastly, I'm wondering, what's the most interesting thing or something that really surprised you about this research, the freshest insights that you've come across, or maybe even from the ambassadors that you've talked to?
Mhm. So I've been really surprised at the when we talk about faith unbundled, the metaphor that I keep coming back to is that it's like showing up at a dinner party. And I'd sort of expected that we would find something that was maybe a little bit more self-centered, that it was going to be more like going to a food court, to use another food metaphor, that you're going to order a little bit from here and order a little bit from there, and have it your way and all this kind of stuff. But the way young people kept describing their engagement with religion, especially among their peers, was that they were very interested in getting to know one another, and getting to know other faith traditions through the lens of how their friends had experienced it and were engaging with it. And so in that way, it's like showing up at a potluck, where it's like, you don't get to decide what's going to be in the Jello mold. Like, you just get the Jello mold, whatever that person brought. That's what you can put on your plate. And so sometimes the combinations are a little bit weird. You find yourself getting a plate full of stuff that you would have never necessarily put together yourself. But it's more authentic because it's coming from that person's personal experience, and young people really resonate with that. So that they're giving up a little bit of, like, they're willing in those cases to give up a little bit of control or individualism when they think that what they're getting in return is an authentic experience from somebody else's life. And they'll, what we found with young people is, like, they'll sign up for that all day long.
That's really interesting. I mean, that's quite intriguing. Did you have an anecdote from someone in particular that you would like to share about that?
Well, it's just, so we covered this in a podcast a couple of seasons ago that actually got me thinking along these lines. It was a young man who is, oh shoot, I think he's Jewish. I was going to say Christian, but I'm pretty sure he's Jewish. But he's like, before baseball games, because he plays baseball, he's like, before games I really like to meditate, which I learned from my Buddhist friends. And so on the one hand, that's like that's potentially like a silly little thing about like how you adopted this like mindfulness practice from a faith tradition. But as we talked like off air about it, it was clear that like he was doing it in part because, yes, it was providing a very tangible benefit in that moment. But he would have never even really understood what it was about or how to do it if his friends that exposed him to it weren't like authentically engaged in it. He just, like, he could have read the Wikipedia article about it, right? But it wouldn't have occurred to him to do it. And so we keep hearing about stuff like that in all kinds of ways. I mean, white suburban kids who you wouldn't expect to be, genuinely engaged in Diwali, at this time of year, who are like not just asking to be, but are being asked to, like, invited over to friends' homes to experience stuff, not as a, partially, as like a sort of like, oh, I've never seen this, what is this? I'm very curious, but to also enter into this like trusted exchange where they are then sharing parts of their own traditions as well. And because of the diversity present in Gen Z and the value that they place on diversity, which is paramount for them, these things become less like field trips. Like I think it would have been maybe from my generation, which was like, oh, look at those people who are different than me, and more about getting to know the people who are already in your community.
Right. I love that, learning from each other makes us better, makes us stronger, makes us grow, and I love the takeaway from that. That's so good. That's definitely right up our alley too.
Sure.
So, but I want to thank you so much, unless you have anything else to add. I mean, this has been a really great, I think, learning experience, and really kind of digging a little bit deeper into the research you've done and hearing from you directly, of course, about it. But if there's anything else you can share, we're happy to hear it.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to get to chat. I would invite anybody who's interested. They can come to our website, springtideresearch.org, but in there, in the About Us, you'll see, or in the community section, you'll see about the ambassadors. And we'd love to, if there are young people in your life that you think would, or if you're a young person listening to this and you think that would be good, something that you'd be interested in. I've just been so moved by the monthly conversations that we've been having with them, and they get to see our research first. They help us shape the questions, and occasionally show up in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post when there's a reporter has a need for comment. So that's the one thing I would just underscore if we're accepting applications for that now.
And we're happy to help promote that as well. That's such a wonderful opportunity. So I want to thank you so much, Josh and Springtide, for being available, for doing this really important research and sharing these insights with us. You've made me hungry after all of your food metaphors. But I learned a lot. I learned some great things even within my own family structure. So I really appreciate that. And please keep us posted on whatever's next.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.